After my husband died, his mother wanted to take everything from me except our daughter. My lawyer begged me to fight back. Welcome to my new story on the mental grand. Diane Calloway stood in my kitchen 11 days after I buried my husband, pointed at the ceiling, the walls, the floor beneath her feet, and told me she was taking all of it. The house, Mark's consulting firm, every bank account, every single asset down to the last dollar. Everything, Hannah, except our 4-year-old daughter, Lily. Because, and I will never forget how casually she said it, she didn't sign up for someone else's child. My name is Miriam Calloway. I'm 31 years old, and until very recently, I lived in Covington, Kentucky, a small city right across the Ohio River from Cincinnati. It's the kind of place where neighbors know your business before you do, and the price of your house is public record before the ink on the contract is dry. I married Mark Calloway when I was 24. He was a business consultant who built his own firm from scratch. Well, from his mother Diane's $185,000 loan and about 6,000 hours of his own sweat. He started in a cramped office above a hardware store on Madison Avenue. You could hear customers picking out paint samples through the floor during client calls. Within 5 years, he'd moved to a real office suite, hired a small staff, and was billing over $600,000 a year. Calloway Consulting. His name was on the door, and his mother never let anyone forget who'd paid to put it there. Mark died on a Thursday evening, March 6th, a massive coronary. They found him at his desk, hand still resting on his coffee mug. He was 36 years old. I got the call while giving Lily a bath. I drove to his office with my sleeves still wet, soap dried under my fingernails. By the time I got there, the paramedics had already stopped. The funeral was the following Wednesday. Diane wore black designer sunglasses indoors, the kind that cover half your face, so you can't tell if the tears are real or just for show. Her younger son, Spencer, stood next to her, looking lost. He was 29, had never held a real job, and lived in Diane's guest house, where his main responsibilities were sleeping in and ordering things online with her credit card. You need to understand Diane. She wasn't a helpless widow. She'd owned 4 dry cleaning stores across northern Kentucky, built them herself after her divorce. She knew business. She knew numbers, or so she thought. Dry cleaning runs on simple math, clothes in, clothes out, cash in the register. She applied that same logic to a consulting firm she'd never once set foot in. To Diane, Mark's practice was just another store, except instead of pressing shirts, you were solving business problems, and instead of quarters, you had over $500,000 flowing through the books. She also treated me, from day one, like a temporary inconvenience Mark would eventually outgrow. I'd been an administrative assistant when we met. Not glamorous, not rich, not from the right family. Diane once introduced me to her friends as Mark's first wife, while we were still very much married and standing right there. So when she showed up in my kitchen that Monday morning, I shouldn't have been surprised. But grief makes you slow. You stand there, absorbing punches you'd normally dodge. Diane walked in wearing a sharp blazer, dressed for a hostile takeover. Spencer trailed behind her with a tape measure. While Diane laid out her case at my kitchen island, Spencer wandered into the guest room and started measuring the closet. I remember thinking, what does he even own that needs measuring? His most prized possession was a gaming chair. Diane presented her case like a boardroom pitch. The firm was built with her money. The house down payment. She'd given us $30,000 7 years ago, and she had never stopped mentioning it. In her mind, she was a silent partner in everything Mark ever built. Now that he was gone, she wanted her investment back with interest. The only thing she didn't want was Lily. She said it so matter-of-factly, like declining a side dish. No, thank you, just the assets. I stood there, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and said nothing. Not because I agreed, but because my brain couldn't process losing my husband and being robbed in the same month. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived, from a lawyer named Robert Sterling. Diane had filed a formal contest of Mark's will and a creditor's claim against his estate for her $185,000 loan. This wasn't just talk anymore. This was a legal war, and she'd launched it before the flowers on Mark's grave had even wilted. Before we continue, please subscribe to The Mental Grand and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Thank you for your support. Now, back to the story. Robert Sterling was sharp. He filed the will contest, arguing Diane's loan was an investment in the firm, giving her a claim to its value. He also filed a separate creditor's claim for the loan itself, two legal fronts at once. Diane was paying him $3.50 an hour and wanted results. But she wasn't content to wait for the courts. The week after filing, she drove to Mark's office, walked in like she owned the place, and started introducing herself to the staff as the new overseer. There were only 4 employees, 2 consultants, a receptionist, and Jeannie, the office manager who'd been with Mark for 6 years. Diane told them all she was assuming control and changes were coming. She told Jeannie to print out the firm's revenue reports for the last 3 years. Jeannie printed them. Diane looked at the top line, over $600,000 in annual billings, nodded and left. She never asked for the expense reports. She never asked about debts. It was like checking your bank balance, only looking at the deposits and deciding you were a millionaire. Then she started calling Mark's clients. One by one, she tracked them down to introduce herself as the person overseeing the transition. She had no legal authority to do this. No license, no knowledge of the cases. But Diane believed confidence was the same as competence. Most of the clients, alarmed by a call from their dead consultant's mother, took their business elsewhere within days. Diane was systematically destroying the very business she was fighting to own. Then came Spencer. A week after Diane's office visit, he pulled up to my house in her SUV with 2 duffel bags, a gaming console, and a bag of chips. He announced he was moving into the guest room because, and I quote, "Mom said it's basically ours now." He hadn't brought sheets, a pillow, or a single piece of professional clothing. I told him to leave. He refused. I called the Covington police. 2 officers arrived, confirmed the house was in Mark's name, and I was the surviving spouse, and escorted Spencer back to his car. He left the chips on my porch. I threw them away. That night, Diane called me. Her voice hit a pitch I didn't know was possible, somewhere between a smoke alarm and an opera singer. She told me I was heartless for throwing her son out. I reminded her Spencer lived in her guest house. She hung up. Meanwhile, my own people were losing faith. My mom drove up from Lexington that weekend, sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Diane had staged her takeover, and said, "Honey, you have to fight this." My best friend Shannon called every night saying the same thing: get a lawyer, get a shark. So I hired Erica Vance. She came recommended by a colleague of Mark's. Erica was in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and a calm, precise energy that made you feel like everything might be okay. She'd handled estate disputes for 20 years. She reviewed Diane's filings in under an hour and told me it was beatable. The loan had no partnership agreement. The will was clean. Erica said, "We fight, we win, and Diane goes home with nothing but a lesson." I told Erica I needed a few days to think. That night after Lily was asleep, I drove to Mark's office. It was almost 9. The building was dark, lit only by exit signs. I unlocked his private office with the spare key I'd always kept and sat at his desk. It still smelled like him, coffee and that cedar cologne he'd worn since college. I opened the bottom drawer, the deep one. Behind a stack of old files, I found a sealed manila envelope. My name was written on it in Mark's handwriting. Just Miriam, with a small heart next to it. I opened it. I read what was inside, and I sat in that dark office for almost an hour without moving. For the first time since March 6th, my mind was completely clear. The next morning, I called Erica. My voice was different, steady, calm. I said, "Erica, I've changed my mind. I don't want to fight. I want to give Diane everything she's asking for." Erica didn't speak for about 10 seconds. For a woman who bills by the hour, that's a long time. "I need to tell you what was in that envelope. 8 months before he died, Mark was diagnosed with a serious heart condition. He'd been having episodes, shortness of breath, chest tightness, strange fatigue. He finally saw a specialist in Cincinnati. The diagnosis was serious. Not immediately fatal, but the kind where your doctor uses words like progressive and long-term management. Mark told no one. Not his mother, not his brother. But Mark was a consultant. He spent his career looking at how businesses failed because people didn't plan. He wasn't going to let that happen to his family. So over those 8 months, while he still went to the office every day, he was quietly arranging the pieces. The envelope contained 3 things. First, a handwritten letter dated weeks before he died. It wasn't a legal document. It was a letter from my husband to me. He wrote about Lily, how she called butterflies flutterbees, and he never wanted to correct her. He wrote about our kitchen, how the morning light hit the counter. The last line read, "Don't let her take what matters. She can have the rest." Second, beneficiary confirmations. Mark had a life insurance policy for $875,000 taken out years ago when he started the firm. A bank had required it as collateral. He updated the beneficiary to me. That money would pay directly to me, outside of probate. Diane couldn't touch it. He'd done the same with his retirement accounts, a 401k with about $150,000 and a Roth IRA with about $60,000. Another $210,000 Diane couldn't reach. Third, the real financial picture of Callaway Consulting. Mark had prepared a detailed summary. The firm billed over $600,000 a year, the number Diane fixated on. But here's what that number actually looked like. $15,000 in vendor debts, a pending settlement from a botched project for $180,000, $47,000 in unpaid payroll taxes, and an office lease with 34 months left at $4,200 a month. That's over $142,000 in future rent. The house was worth $385,000, but Mark had taken out a $220,000 home equity line to keep the firm afloat. Add the original mortgage, and selling the house would net nothing. And Diane's precious loan? She was an unsecured creditor, last in line behind the IRS and everyone else. Her loan was gone the day Mark died. I sat there doing the math. My side, nearly $1.2 million clean and already mine. Diane's side, approximately $500,000 in liabilities. The next day, Jeannie, Mark's office manager, called me. Diane had fired her with no notice. Jeannie confirmed every number in Mark's summary. She also told me something that made me close my eyes and breathe. When Diane came to the office, she'd only asked for revenue reports. She never once looked at the liabilities. I called Erica. I said, "Offer Diane everything. The house, the firm. All I want is full custody of Lily, no visitation for Diane." I brought Mark's envelope to her office. Erica read it, checked the numbers, and leaned back in her chair, laughing. She looked at me and said, "Mark was brilliant." Then she started drafting the settlement. Erica contacted Robert Sterling with an offer that looked like a total surrender. Miriam would relinquish all claims to the estate assets. In return, full custody of Lily and Diane drops the will contest. Sterling was suspicious. He asked Diane for 2 weeks to do a full forensic audit. Diane said no. She'd seen Miriam fold for 7 years. She thought Miriam was folding again. She told Sterling, "I've seen the revenue. Get me those papers before she changes her mind." Sterling pushed back, drafting a formal letter advising against it. Diane signed a waiver, acknowledging she was proceeding against his advice, and told him to schedule the signing. Sterling also asked Erica directly about non-estate assets. Erica responded exactly as she should have. They were outside the scope of the settlement and not required to be disclosed. Diane dismissed it. Mark never mentioned life insurance to her. He was 36. Why would he have it? While Diane was signing waivers, I was building my new life. The insurance claim processed in 3 weeks. $875,000 deposited into a new account I'd opened. I rolled over the retirement accounts. I found a nice 2-bedroom apartment in Florence, 20 minutes south. First and last month's rent, $1,800. I paid it without blinking. The signing was scheduled for a Tuesday in late June. I arrived with Erica. Diane walked in with Spencer and Sterling. She was dressed like she was accepting an award. Spencer wore a new blazer, the price tag still tucked into the collar. Nobody told him. The documents were straightforward. I transfer all claims to the estate assets. Diane accepts them, along with all liabilities. In exchange, I get full custody of Lily. Erica made one quiet statement for the record, confirming the opposing party had reviewed and accepted the estate inclusive of all disclosed liabilities. Sterling confirmed. Diane didn't even look up. I signed. Diane signed. The whole thing took 8 minutes. As I stood to leave, Diane couldn't resist. She said she hoped I'd finally learn to stand on my own 2 feet. Spencer nodded along. I picked up my bag, walked out, collected Lily from daycare, and drove to our apartment. I made her mac and cheese, the kind with the dinosaur shapes. We watched cartoons. She fell asleep on the couch. I carried her to bed and sat on my kitchen floor, just breathing. It was the most peaceful evening I'd had in months. 3 weeks later, Diane Calloway walked into Calloway Consulting as its legal owner. Day one, she opened a stack of mail. The third envelope was from the IRS. Notice of unpaid payroll taxes, 47,000, penalties accruing. Day 3, a call from an attorney about the $180,000 settlement. Payment was overdue. Day 5, the landlord called about the lease. Diane signed a personal guarantee for the remaining $142,000. Day 8, she tried to open Mark's financial files. Without Jeannie, it was chaos. She hired a temp accountant who spent 4 hours going through everything before turning to Diane and saying, "Ma'am, are you aware there are over 115,000 in outstanding vendor invoices?" Day 10, Jeannie filed a wrongful termination claim. Diane called Sterling that night. He read her own signed waiver back to her. Then she called me. I saw her name on my phone, watched it ring 4 times, and set the phone down. Diane hired a new attorney, a sharp woman from Cincinnati named Betsy Cole. Betsy reviewed everything and told Diane the truth. She was represented, advised to wait, and signed a waiver. No fraud, no case. Her exact words were reportedly, "What you have is not a legal claim. What you have is a very expensive lesson." Diane tried to sell the house. The realtor ran the numbers. After paying off the mortgage, the home equity line, and costs, Diane would owe money at closing. The house wasn't an asset, it was an exit fee. She started dipping into her personal savings, selling her dry cleaning stores one by one. Spencer, who had been playing manager for 19 days, suddenly remembered he had somewhere else to be. He tried to remove himself as co-signer from the firm's accounts, but the bank said no. He hired his own lawyer to sue his mother. Mother and son, who had stood in my kitchen making plans, were now paying separate attorneys to fight each other. The last time Diane called me, I answered. She was crying, real tears. She said she was losing everything. She didn't know. She needed help. I listened. And when she finished, I said, "Diane, you stood in my kitchen and told me you wanted everything except my daughter. You said you didn't sign up for someone else's child. You wanted the house, the firm, every dollar. I gave you exactly what you asked for." Then I hung up and went back to helping Lily glue macaroni onto paper. That night, after Lily was in bed, I sat at my little kitchen table, the one I'd assembled myself, and opened my laptop. I filled out the application for a certification program at the community college. Tuition was $4,200 a semester. My bank account had plenty. On my nightstand, in a simple frame, was Mark's letter. I read the last line before I turned off the light. "Don't let her take what matters. She can have the rest." Thank you so much for staying with me through this whole story on the mental grand. If it moved you even a little, there's another one waiting on your screen right now. Click it, and I'll see you there.